The St. Louis Hotel Rotunda smelled like river mud, expensive cigars, and nervous sweat that October evening in 1851. Gas lamps hissed overhead, throwing long shadows across marble floors worn smooth by a decade of desperate deals. Auctioneer Claude Moreau climbed the podium, adjusted his spectacles, and called Lot 47 in a voice that cracked just once. No plantation listed, no trade skills, no family history. The ledger entry was brutally short. Elara. Prime condition. Silent disposition. She stepped onto the platform in plain linen shift. Head high, shoulders square, mid to 20s. Skin like dark polished teak under the lamps. Eyes so deep they seemed to pull the light in. She didn't fidget, didn't look at the floor. She turned slowly and scanned the crowd. Every planter, every factor, every river gambler, like she was already adding up what each man owed the world. The room went quiet for one long heartbeat. Then bidding exploded. It started at $3,200, already steep. Within seconds it doubled. Men who haggled over cotton bales lost their minds. A riverboat captain shouted $5,000. A sugar baron countered $5,800. Final hammer fell to Remy Duval, cotton factor from Baton Rouge. Duval was 40, broad-shouldered, loud, and absolutely certain nothing could touch him. He signed the transfer with a flourish, grinning at the uneasy faces around him. "Some men buy paintings," he told a rival as he led her out. "I just bought perfection." His townhouse on Royal Street was all crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and imported rugs. Elara was given a small room off the kitchen. Duval expected her to serve, to smile, to show gratitude. Instead, she walked into the parlor that first night and stopped dead in front of the large oil portrait of Duval's late father. The old man's painted eyes seemed to follow her. She stared back harder. Duval laughed it off at first, ordered her to pour wine at his Friday card game. She moved through the room like smoke, pausing behind each player. One man, a banker named Girard, dropped his cards, sweat suddenly beading on his forehead. "Air's gone wrong in here," he muttered. Bolting for the door, others left soon after. Duval blamed the humidity, the wine, anything but her. Next morning, his wife Celeste found him in the study, face ashen, hands shaking over scattered papers. She had woken before dawn with an urge she couldn't explain, to pry open a locked drawer she'd never touched. Inside, duplicate ledgers, years of skimmed profits from his father's estate, quietly funneled to a mistress and 2 children in Mobile. Celeste stood in the doorway holding the proof, voice calm and terrible. "Explain this, Remy." He tried lies, then rage, then tears. The marriage cracked open like rotten fruit in the heat. Duval returned Elara to the hotel the next afternoon. Moreau's hand shook as he wrote in the ledger, "Returned, domestic discord, no refund requested." The rotunda whispered, "Curse." Men laughed nervously, slapped each other on the back. But when Lot 47 went back on the block 2 days later, the bidding was even fiercer. $6,200 to sugar planter Victor Langlois. Langlois sneered at the rumors. Duval was soft. "I'll tame her." He took her to his upriver plantation. That night, Elara walked into the rose garden and stopped under an ancient magnolia. Staring at a patch of bare earth, Langlois ordered her inside. She didn't move. His overseer dragged her. She kept staring. 3 days later, Langlois's 12-year-old daughter screamed from the garden path. The family dug where Elara had fixed her gaze, 2 feet down, tiny bones wrapped in a blanket embroidered with the Langlois crest. A child he'd fathered with a governess years before, smothered at birth, buried in secret to protect his name. His wife collapsed. Langlois, aged a decade in an hour, returned again. Price climbed, $6,900. The pattern had begun. Victor Langlois took Elara to his sprawling sugar plantation upriver from New Orleans. Fields stretching under a merciless sun, the big house white and proud against the green. He was 45, broad as a barrel, and convinced no woman, enslaved or free, could unsettle him. Duval was weak, he told his overseer on the boat ride. I'll break her in a week. The first night she walked straight into the rose garden behind the house and stopped under an ancient magnolia. She stared at a patch of bare earth. No flowers, no marker, just dirt. Langlois watched from the veranda, arms crossed. Move, he barked. She didn't. He sent the overseer to drag her inside. She kept staring, even as rough hands pulled her away. Langlois laughed it off, assigned her to serve at dinner. She moved through the dining room like a shadow, pausing behind each family member. His wife Elise stiffened when Elara stood behind her chair. His 12-year-old daughter Sophie kept glancing back, eyes wide. She's looking at nothing, Sophie whispered. Langlois snapped at her to be quiet. 2 days passed. Elara returned to the garden every night, always the same spot under the magnolia. The house staff began avoiding that path. The dogs wouldn't go near it. Langlois grew irritated. She's testing me, he told Elise. I'll show her who owns this land. On the third morning, Sophie screamed from the garden path. The family rushed out. The girl was pointing at the ground where Elara had stared. There's something crying under there, she sobbed. Elise, pale, ordered the gardener to dig. Langlois forbade it, then gave in when his wife's eyes turned cold. 2 feet down, small bones wrapped in a decaying blanket. Embroidered on the edge, the Langlois family crest. Elise recognized it instantly. She dropped to her knees. Langlois stood frozen. The child had been his, born to a young governess 3 years earlier. He'd ordered it smothered at birth, buried in secret to protect his name and his marriage. The governess had been sent away with money and threats. No one knew, until now. Elise looked at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. You told me it was a stillbirth, she whispered. You buried our shame, and now it's looking back. Langlois tried to shout orders, to blame the gardener, to call it coincidence, but the bones were real. The blanket was real. Elise walked back to the house without another word. That afternoon she packed a trunk. By evening she was gone, taking Sophie and the younger children to her sister in Mobile. Langlois returned Elara to the hotel the next morning. Moreau's ledger entry was shorter than before. Returned. Unsuitable. Family disturbance. No explanation. No refund demanded. The rotunda buzzed louder now. Men who'd laughed before weren't laughing. Whispers spread. She finds what you hide. She sees the dead. But greed is louder than fear. When Lot 47 went back on the block, the bidding climbed again. $6,900 to Judge Harlan Voss, a man from St. Landry Parish who sat on the bench like a king. Voss was 50, silver-haired, respected, feared. He believed in law, order, and his own invincibility. Superstition is for the weak, he told Moreau as he signed. I'll prove it. He took Elara to his plantation mansion, Bellevue, isolated in the bayou swamps. Voss thought he could control her with rules. With his courtroom stare, he was wrong. That first night she stood in his private study, gazing at the heavy iron safe bolted to the floor. Voss found her there at midnight, motionless. He ordered her out. She didn't move. He reached for his pistol. Before he could decide what to do next, his son, 21, home from university, walked in. The young man stared at Elara, then at the safe. Father, what's in there? The question hung like smoke. The next morning, the son opened the safe with a stolen key. Inside, a forged will. Voss had altered his late brother's document years ago, disinheriting his own nephews and claiming the entire family fortune. Proof sat in black ink, dated, signed. The confrontation was brutal. The son left that afternoon with copies of the will and a vow to expose everything. Voss stood alone in the study, pistol in hand, staring at the empty spot where Elara had been. Returned the same day. Ledger note. Returned. Legal incompatibility. The pattern was no longer rumor. It was fact. Judge Harlan Voss arrived at the St. Louis Hotel Rotunda like he owned the place, which, in a way, he did. 50 years old, silver hair swept back, eyes the color of storm clouds. He sat on the bench in St. Landry Parish like a king on a throne, sentencing men with a flick of his wrist. To him, the rumors about Lot 47 were childish nonsense. Superstition is the refuge of weak minds, he told auctioneer Claude Moreau, as he signed the transfer for $7,200. I deal in facts, and facts bend to law. He took Elara to Bellevue, his isolated bayou mansion surrounded by cypress and black water. The house was all dark wood and heavy drapes, a place where secrets had always been safe. Voss assigned her to the household staff, expecting obedience. That first night, she walked straight to his private study and stopped in front of the heavy iron safe bolted to the floorboards. She stared at it, unblinking, motionless. Voss found her there at midnight, lamp in hand. "Get out," he ordered. She didn't move. He stepped closer, voice dropping to the low growl he used in court. "You will obey, or you will suffer." Still nothing. He reached for the pistol in his desk drawer. Before he could decide what came next, his son Nathaniel, 21, home from university, pushed the door open. The young man froze in the doorway. He looked at Elara, then at the safe, then at his father's hand on the pistol. "Father, what's in there?" Voss snapped the drawer shut. "Nothing that concerns you. Go to bed." But the question lingered. The next morning, Nathaniel stole the key from his father's coat while Voss was at breakfast. He opened the safe. Inside, a forged will dated 10 years earlier. Voss had altered his late brother's document, cutting out his brother's 3 children, and claiming the entire family estate for himself. The forgery was meticulous, ink matched, signatures traced, but the evidence was undeniable. Proof of theft on a grand scale. Nathaniel confronted his father in the study that afternoon, papers in hand, voice shaking, but steady. "You stole from your own blood. You lied to everyone, including Mother." Voss tried bluster first, then threats, then silence. The judge who had sentenced hundreds suddenly had no words. Nathaniel left that evening, with copies of the will, and a vow to take it to the state Supreme Court. Voss stood alone in the room, staring at the spot where Elara had been. The safe door hung open, like an accusation. He returned her to the hotel the same day. Moreau's ledger entry was curt. Returned. Legal incompatibility. No explanation given. The rotunda was quieter now. Men who'd once laughed avoided eye contact. Whispers had become warnings. She finds what you buried. She sees what you won't admit. But the auction continued. Greed always finds a way. Next buyer, Elias Crow, a shipping magnate from the riverfront. Crow was 48, ruthless, and convinced money could silence anything. He paid $7,800 without hesitation. "I've buried worse than rumors," he told Moreau. "She'll learn her place on my ships." He took her to his warehouse compound near the levee. That night, Elara walked to the back loading dock and stopped, staring at a stack of old crates marked for disposal. Crow ordered them moved. She kept staring. 2 days later, a customs inspector, tipped by an anonymous letter, arrived with warrants. The crates Elara had fixed on, hidden compartments packed with smuggled opium and forged manifests. Crow's entire fleet was implicated. His empire crumbled in a week. Arrested, bankrupt, broken, returned again. Price climbed to $8,100. The ledger was filling faster now, and the city was starting to feel the weight of what it had unleashed. The rotunda felt colder each time Lot 47 returned. Men who once crowded the podium now hung back, watching from the edges like they expected lightning. But the price kept rising. Greed has a way of drowning fear. The sixth buyer was Deacon Jeremiah Hale, 52. Tall, gaunt, with a voice that could fill a church without effort. He pastored the biggest congregation in the Garden District, preached fire and brimstone every Sunday, and collected donations like a tax collector. To him, Elara was a test from God. The Lord sends trials to the righteous, he told Moreau, as he paid $8,300. I'll prove my faith is stronger than any shadow. Hale took her to his parsonage behind the church, a tall, narrow house of white clapboard and stained glass. He assigned her to clean the sanctuary and the private rooms upstairs. That first evening, she walked into his study and stopped in front of the floorboards beneath his writing desk. She stared down at the exact spot where a loose plank had been nailed tight years ago. Hale noticed immediately. "What are you looking at, girl?" No answer. He knelt, pressed the board. Nothing gave. He laughed it off as stubbornness, ordered her to pray with him. She stood silent while he knelt and recited psalms. Her eyes never left the floor. 2 nights later, Hale woke to the sound of scratching, soft, insistent, like fingernails on wood. He found Elara kneeling in his study, tracing the seam of that same plank with one finger. The house was dead quiet, except for that slow scrape. Hale's heart hammered. He grabbed a crowbar from the shed and pried the board himself. Underneath, a small tin box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, his private journals, pages filled with doubts he'd never confessed. Questions about God's silence during yellow fever outbreaks, guilt over turning away poor families who couldn't pay pew rent, and worse, entries detailing how he'd diverted church funds to buy a small cottage for a young widow in the parish, a woman he visited twice a month. The last entry, dated 3 weeks earlier. She says the child is mine. I told her to leave the city. May God forgive what I cannot. Hale stared at the pages like they were burning his hands. The journals weren't hidden by accident. He'd buried them there himself after a nightmare where the widow's face appeared in every stained glass window. He'd convinced himself no one would ever know. The next morning, he confronted Elara in the sanctuary. "How did you know?" She didn't speak, just looked at him with those endless eyes. Something cracked inside him. Faith, pride, whatever had held him upright. He locked himself in the study. By afternoon, rumors were flying through the congregation. A deacon's wife had seen the journals when Hale left them open on the desk in his panic. Whispers turned to shouts. That Sunday, the pews were half empty. By Monday, the church elders demanded his resignation. He was defrocked in a closed meeting. The widow left the city the same week. Hale returned Elara to the hotel that evening. Moreau's entry was almost illegible. Returned. Moral collapse. The pattern was undeniable now. 6 buyers, 6 ruins, and the city was starting to fracture under the weight of what she kept dragging into the open. The rotunda now felt like a courtroom waiting for sentence. Men who once shouted bids now spoke in low voices, glancing over shoulders. But the auctioneer's gavel still fell, and the price for Lot 47 kept climbing. The 7th buyer was Gideon Hawthorne, timber baron from the Atchafalaya Basin, 55, built like an oak, voice like gravel. He'd carved his fortune from cypress swamps, land he'd acquired through questionable deeds and quiet threats. Hawthorne paid $8,600 without blinking. I've buried bigger problems than a staring woman, he told Moreau. She'll cut timber, or she'll rot in the swamp. He took Elara to his compound deep in the basin, sawmill roaring, stacks of logs like fallen soldiers, the big house perched on stilts above black water. Hawthorne assigned her to the cookhouse. That first dusk, she walked past the mill and stopped at the edge of a cleared patch where the ground looked freshly turned. No marker, no sign, just her gaze fixed on the dirt. Hawthorne watched from the porch, chewing tobacco. Move along, he growled. She didn't. He sent 2 men to drag her back. She kept staring even as they pulled her away. The next night, she returned to the same spot, stood there until moonrise. The watchdogs circled, but wouldn't come closer. Hawthorne grew restless. She's mocking me, he told his foreman. I'll show her what happens to things that don't obey. 3 days later, a surveyor, hired by a rival company sniffing for irregularities, arrived with maps and warrants. He was pointed to the exact patch Elara had stared at. The ground was dug. 4 feet down, human remains, not one body. 7 adults and children, bones wrapped in scraps of clothing, some still showing traces of color that matched the free people of color, who'd once farmed that land before Hawthorne claimed it in 1838. The deed he'd used was forged. The original owners had vanished after a night of fire and screams. Everyone knew. No one had dared speak. The surveyor called in federal marshals. Hawthorne's empire unraveled in hours. Arrest warrants, land seizures. His wife, long silent about the stories she'd heard, left with their children before the papers were served. The sawmill shut down. Workers walked away. The man who'd once owned miles of forest was left with nothing but echoes. Hawthorne returned Elara to the hotel that same week. Moreau's hand shook so badly the entry smeared. Returned. Property dispute. No refund. 8 now. 8 lives cracked open. The city was fracturing. Wives whispered in parlors. Servants met eyes in back alleys. Men who'd never feared anything suddenly checked locks twice. The ledger was no longer just a sales record. It was becoming a list of casualties. The St. Louis Hotel Rotunda was half empty by mid-December 1851. Men who once filled the space now avoided it like a plague house. Whispers had become warnings passed in parlors and back alleys. She sees what you won't admit. She finds what you buried. But the auctioneer's gavel still fell, and the price for Lot 47 had become a legend in itself. The 12th and final buyer was Madame Celeste Moreau, widow of a minor shipping clerk who'd left her a modest fortune and a childless house on Esplanade Avenue. She was 41, quiet, elegant in black silk, and carried herself like someone who had already lost everything worth losing. Celeste paid $9,200 shyer than any man had dared without a tremor in her voice. The rotunda went dead silent when the hammer fell. She didn't speak to Moreau, just signed, took Elara's arm gently, and walked her out into the December dusk. No carriage. They walked the few blocks home side by side, like 2 women returning from market. Celeste's house was small but graceful. High ceilings, lace curtains, a courtyard with a single jasmine vine. She gave Elara a room with a window overlooking the garden. No locks, no orders. That first night, Celeste sat in the parlor with a glass of sherry and watched Elara walk the courtyard paths. Elara paused by the jasmine, stared at the base of the vine for a long moment, then came inside and stood in the doorway. For the first time in months, someone spoke to her without command. "You don't have to serve me," Celeste said softly. "You don't have to stay, but if you want to, I won't turn you away." Elara looked at her, really looked, not through her, not past her, at her. Celeste felt the weight of it like a hand on her chest. She set the glass down. "I know what they say about you," Celeste continued, "that you find things, that you break men. I don't have much left to break. My husband died owing money I didn't know about. The house is mortgaged. The child we never had, I lost before I could name her." She paused. "If there's something here you need to see, show me." Elara turned and walked to the courtyard again. Celeste followed. Elara stopped at the jasmine vine and pointed, not dramatically, just one finger toward the soil. Celeste knelt, bare hands in the dirt. She dug, shallow, only a foot down. She hit cloth, a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. Inside, a tiny embroidered cap, a lock of dark baby hair, and a folded note in her husband's handwriting. "Forgive me, I couldn't bear the pain. I buried her here the night she was stillborn. I told you she lived a day. I lied to spare you. I was wrong." Celeste sat back on the ground, clutching the bundle. Tears came quietly. She looked up at Elara. "You didn't bring this pain," she said. "You just let me see it." Elara said nothing, but she reached out, slowly, and touched Celeste's hand. The first voluntary contact anyone could remember. Celeste held on for a long moment. The next morning, Celeste walked Elara to the levee. No chains, no guards. She pressed a small pouch of coins into Elara's hand. "Go," she said, "wherever you need to be. I won't stop you." Elara looked at her one last time. Long, steady, then turned and walked into the river mist. She didn't run. She didn't look back. She simply vanished into the fog rolling off the Mississippi. Celeste returned home alone. She burned the mortgage papers that night, paid what she could, kept the house, and every year, on the anniversary of that night, she placed fresh jasmine on the spot where the bundle had been buried. She never spoke of Elara again, but the jasmine bloomed brighter than it ever had before. The ledger ended there. Lot 47 was never listed again. No record of sale, no return, no trace. Some say she walked north. Some say she melted into the bayou. In the quarters, they sang quiet songs about the silent woman who broke chains without touching them. In the big houses, men still check locks twice when they hear jasmine on the wind. And somewhere, perhaps, a gaze still waits, watching, patient, ready to find what's been buried too long.